Joining us now, Jill Wine-Banks, former assistant Watergate special prosecutor and an MSNBC contributor. Ron Klain, former chief of staff to Vice President Joe Biden and Al Gore and a former senior aide to President Obama. He is also a former chief counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee. Also with us, Jennifer Rubin, conservative opinion writer at the Washington Post and an MSNBC contributor. Jill, your interpretation of what you heard the president say today about his cooperation with the special prosecutor.
Well, there are three things that I want to say about that. One, it's not his choice. If he wants to try to evade what he had already promised, he can be subpoenaed. So he either cooperates, which would be politically the smart thing to do, or he gets subpoenaed, which would be politically very bad for him. He has to appear. He has to testify. He would not be the first president to do that. We interviewed Nixon after he resigned. Clinton had to testify, Ford had to testify, so he's going to have to testify, and he may as well do it gracefully instead of making it look even worse for him.
Go ahead, Jill, sorry.
The second thing, which is really important, is that it's sort of like what led to the Saturday Night Massacre, when Nixon tried to compromise with us by offering, he wouldn't give us the tapes, he would let Senator Stennis listen to the tapes and tell us what they said, which would not have been admissible evidence. We couldn't accept that. That's what led to the press conference that led to the Saturday Night Massacre. So he can't compromise, and I don't think Mueller will be likely to say, okay, you can answer written questions. That's just not going to happen. And the third thing is, he's going to be in a big risk because he doesn't know what Flynn actually knows, what other cooperating witnesses, Papadopoulos and maybe others who are cooperating, he doesn't know. John Dean has said the biggest mistake the White House made during Watergate was they didn't realize how much he knew. And he testified fully. And that was a very good grounds for us to cross-examine all of the defendants, including the president. So I think those are important things to keep in mind in this.
Ron and Jill, I want you to put your heads together on this, if you might. And Ron, on the question of a federal criminal process here, let's say this comes to a subpoena. Who goes to the White House with what subpoena? And I mean quite literally, Ron, since you've worked there, how does that person get into the White House? Because the only way into the White House is that someone in the White House has to grant you that admission at the White House gate. How does this work?
Well, you know, Lawrence, we'll see just how obstreperous President Trump gets. But there are definitely ways to serve that subpoena. At the end of the day, you know, it's the duty, ultimately, I suppose, of the Deputy Attorney General on one of his weekly visits over to the White House to deliver it if need be. I'm not really worried about the subpoena getting there. I think the question is what President Trump does when it arrives. And as Jill said, this isn't a question of what he wants to do. He has no choice. He has one right that's left, though. We talked the other night about the briefing onto the Constitution Donald Trump got. I hope he got up to the Fifth Amendment, because that may be, that may be what this comes down to, whether or not we have the incredible spectacle of the sitting President of the United States repeatedly asserting his Fifth Amendment defense to decline to answer Bob Mueller's questions. That's really the only option in the end Donald Trump has.
I have a funny feeling the Fifth Amendment is the only one that Donald Trump knew before becoming president. But, Jill, let me go back to you just quickly on this procedural notion. Did you have to consider this during the Nixon investigation? If we have to serve a subpoena, how do we actually put the piece of paper in the president's hand?
We actually did worry about that. We eventually worked out the subpoena, went through his lawyers, and they accepted delivery of the subpoena. But then we worried about if he didn't comply with the subpoena by turning over the documents, how would we get a marshal to enter the White House to seize the documents? Mm-hmm. That was a serious question, and we never really figured out an answer, but luckily public pressure after the Saturday Night Massacre forced the president to agree to give us the tapes.
And Jennifer Rubin, as we sit here tonight discussing this, Richard Nixon seems like such a reasonable man compared to...
And a smart one, yes.
Yeah, compared to Donald Trump. Also, a law school graduate who understood the process and ultimately, I think Jill would agree, recognized that there wasn't going to be a way this was eventually going to close in, and he wasn't going to put the country through this strange exercise of a marshal standing out on Pennsylvania Avenue trying to figure out how to get in. Right. But Jennifer, what's your reaction to what you heard the president say today, backing off that 100% guarantee that he would cooperate?
Well, you have to understand that despite all the bluster, despite all the chest pounding and the throwing the dust in the air, Donald Trump is a coward. He's a physical coward. He's an emotional coward. So he will not have the nerve to stand up and say, I won't be questioned by Mr. Mueller. And then when he does, he is going to be putty in his hand because three things. One, he doesn't know what he shouldn't say. He doesn't know, and he still doesn't accept that obstruction of justice is something that he can commit and can be prosecuted after leaving office or impeached for. Secondly, he doesn't know what the other people know. And third of all, he doesn't know what the special prosecutors have in terms of documentary evidence about his finances. So it is a minefield. I can imagine his lawyers must be having a nervous breakdown at the prospect that he would be testifying under oath. Really, Trump has two choices and two choices only. One, he can do this in an interview where maybe his lawyers get to be present, or secondly, he can do it in front of a grand jury where even his lawyer isn't there. So he can pick his poison, but he's going to have to go there and do his bit.
The president issued an angry tweet today about all of these investigations, saying it's a witch hunt, and ending with the line, saying the world's laughing at us, and ending with the line, Republicans should finally take control. And Ron Klain, it was not clear to me whether he meant that Republicans should take control of the investigations going on in the committees and the congressional investigations, or whether he meant they should also take control of the special prosecutor's investigation.
Yeah, I think this is a little bit of King Henry, won't someone rid me of this man? You know, he is looking for someone to shut this thing down because the water is rising. And let's be clear, the only witch hunt going on here is a question of which members of the Trump inner circle committed which crimes, because that is the witches we're down to. There are convictions, there are indictments. I mean, you know, this is far from anything other than a rounding of the wagons to figure out ultimately who gets charged with what. And that's got to be scaring Donald Trump tonight.
Well, luckily, a reporter got a chance to ask the president today what he meant by Republicans taking control of the investigation. And we have that video right now.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Jill, he meant thank you very much, apparently. That was his answer to that question.
That's his answer to a lot of questions, and I think he has plenty to be worried about. And I think we're also getting away from what the main purpose of the congressional investigations is, which is to find out how to protect American elections from the Russians interfering with them. And I think that the Democratic report today, Senator Cardin spoke very well about that, is something that we need to pay attention to. What are the steps we should be taking before 2018 so that we have a free and fair election, not subject to foreign intervention?
And Jennifer, that is the part that I'm so glad Jill brought it up. That's the part that gets lost in all of this, in all of our coverage, because we are pursuing this criminal investigation at the same time. But there is also the issue of how do we protect this country's election process going forward. And this is an administration that's doing absolutely nothing about that. Right.
That's what really struck me is, first of all, the Republicans didn't join in this report. It's a superb report. I talked to a number of foreign policy specialists. It's detailed. It's factually accurate. It makes concrete suggestions. Why in the world Republicans would not join in this in any other time? It would be unheard of. But they can't join in it because Donald Trump won't admit that Russia is a real problem. So are they interested in protecting the country? Doesn't seem like it. And secondly, if you go back to that transcript from the fascinating interview before the Judicial Committee by Glenn R. Simpson, who is the founder of Fusion GPS, it is very obvious that the lawyer doing the questioning on behalf of the Republicans is interested in no real substantive data. His entire line of questioning had nothing to do with the substance, either of the dossier, the so-called dossier, or the level of confidence that Fusion GPS had in the dossier, or anything else in substance. They are there for one reason and one reason only, and that is to protect the president. In that regard, they've become complicit in this. They've become co-enablers. They've become co-conspirators in a plot to obstruct justice. And I think when this all washes out, there are going to be people like Lindsey Graham, who used to have a spine and who now, I think, just pines to be Mr. Trump's Secretary of State, who are going to look very bad in the light of history.
And Jill, to Jennifer's point, when you read that transcript, as I did yesterday, the first, long hour of it at least, is all this stuff that is not directly on point to why this witness is there. Once you get to the real issues of why the witness is there, it's really just the Democratic staff that are asking those questions, although you can't tell in the reading of that whether it's Democratic staff or Republican staff. The questions all make perfect sense, and they're trying to pursue what was really going on in that investigation. But when you step back for it and look at who asked the questions, the Republican staff, as Jennifer points out, really did not ask virtually any relevant questions at all.
You are both absolutely correct, and it is very much confounding to me that there could have been a criminal referral made by Graham and Grassley after that testimony. It's clear that he Steele was a completely credible source, that the FBI wasn't acting fast enough, and he was genuinely concerned about the impact on American election and on American democracy. And if he went to the press, it was because he was trying to make sure that Americans knew what was going on and that he believed his information and had credible information. So it's a very concerning how the Republicans handled that hearing and the suppression of the tape. Congratulations to Senator Feinstein for releasing it.
We are now going to have to create a new graphic for this show written by Ron Klain called Witch Hunt, W-H-I-C-H. Jill Wine-Banks.
Except for my pin. Notice my witch pin.
Right. Jill Wine-Banks and Ron Klain, thank you both very much for joining us tonight.